Hi there. Welcome to episode 87 of Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm Erin Harris, and in just a second, you'll hear my conversation with Carsten Linnemann, Ph.D. Carsten is CEO of Neogene Therapeutics and head of Oncology, Cell Therapy, Clinical Development at AstraZeneca. Neogene was founded in 2018, and it's a clinical stage biotech focused on developing TCR therapies for solid cancers. Carsten and I talk through Neogene's innovative approach to targeting neoantigens in cancer treatment, and he shares that the evolution of T-cell receptor therapies has been mind-blowing. You'll hear the example he shares of a process that was very complex 15 years ago when he was earning his PhD, but today has become very efficient. Oh, and by the way, he received his PhD with honors for his work on engineering T-cell immunity by TCR gene transfer in the laboratory of Dr. Ton Schumacher at the Netherlands Cancer Institute. If you're familiar with Cell and Gene and the educational content we publish, you know that in addition to covering advanced cellular and genetic treatments for cancer, we also deliver information on the future landscape of cell therapy beyond oncology. I asked Carsten for his take on what's to come outside of oncology, so tune in to hear what he has to say. Several past episodes of Cell and Gene, the podcast, are adjacent or related to TCR-based approaches. For example, definitely go back and check out episode 50 when I talked to Affini-T Therapeutics Co-Founder, CEO, and President, Dr. Jak Knowles. The company combines a validated TCR discovery platform with synthetic biology switches to attack tumor biology at its root cause. It's a great episode, and I definitely think you should check it out. All right. Here's my conversation with Neogene Therapeutics, Carsten Linnemann. Enjoy. Hi, Carsten. Welcome to Cell and Gene, the podcast.
Hey, Erin. Good morning. Very nice to be with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So talk to us a little bit about Neogene Therapeutics. What inspired the founding of the company? And then, talk to us a little bit about your mission to pioneer TCR or T-cell receptor therapies for solid cancers. Where are you guys?
Sure. So Neogene Therapeutics, as you said, is really all about next generation T-cell receptor therapies for solid cancers. I'm a scientist by training. I've spent all my career to date on developing T-cell receptor therapies, primarily for patients with cancer at this point. And I'm tremendously excited about the modality. And Neogene Therapeutics really was, at the time, the next step of my journey in trying to develop these therapies for patients. So I think what makes TCR-Ts special and a great opportunity as a treatment for cancer patients is the fact that T-cell receptors allow us to target a space in tumors that otherwise is really hard to reach. So what we do at Neogene is we use these T-cell receptors, which are basically molecules at the surface of T cells, to enable these T cells to find basically a cancer cell in the body, and then once they find it, effectively eliminate that. So it's basically an engineering process, a little bit like building a robot that then goes into the patient's body and finds cells, like cancer cells, that are potentially harmful. What we're doing at Neogene is we're specialized in basically all the things you need to develop these therapies, which is, most importantly, you need to have the right T-cell receptor gene that you engineer in these T cells. So we have a specific way of finding these molecules and finding them in a way that is high throughput and allows us to screen many of them to find hopefully enough to treat large groups of patients. And then we also specialized in developing means to not only put a T-cell receptor in these T cells, but also modify these T cells in other ways that they become more effective in basically finding and killing tumor cells. And then we've combined all of that together with also the infrastructure you need to provide these kinds of therapies to patients. The process basically is based on the idea that you collect a blood sample from a patient that then arrives in our manufacturing facilities, and we modify these cells in the laboratory before they go back to the patient. So it's quite a specific logistic and not quite the same as with other drugs that are available off the shelf.
Sure. Thank you for that explanation. And with all of that, what I want our listener to know, or perhaps understand if they don't already, is that AstraZeneca acquired Neogene Therapeutics back in 2023. And so, with that acquisition, what opportunities has Neogene been able to take advantage of, and maybe what has changed or even improved since the acquisition?
Yeah, so I think through the acquisition of AstraZeneca, Neogene actually joined an organization that I think shares our passion for these kind of therapies, the idea of modifying immune cells to fight cancer. And what we created, I think, is a very unique blend of expertise and technologies. As I mentioned, Neogene is really specialized on T cell receptor genes and molecules to engineer them into T cells, but you can also use other genes, so-called chimeric antigen receptors. And that was really an expertise we didn't have in Neogene, but that was pre-existing in AstraZeneca. So we really brought two complementary technologies together. Neogene and AstraZeneca both had infrastructure for the modification of these cells, the manufacturing sites that you need. So there was also a lot of synergy there. And it really allowed us to, I think, accelerate overall as a joint team to bring these therapies to patients. So ever since we joined AstraZeneca, Neogene has started 3 additional clinical trials in the US. We could dramatically accelerate our science because we're part of a larger team with lots of complementary expertise and also resources. So it really was an exciting step on the ambition of providing this to patients.
Yeah, sure. I want to talk a little bit more and get a little bit deeper into the TCR therapies themselves. So, talk to our listeners a little bit about what would you say are the key challenges and opportunities you see in developing TCR therapies targeting neoantigens, kind of the why behind it. What were you up against? What opportunities do you see? And the potential benefits of TCR-Ts for cancer treatment just in general.
So I think T cell receptor therapies, ever since I've been following the field, has undergone dramatic changes. I've been a scientist in the space for the past 15 years or so, and the changes I've seen is just mind blowing. I mean, you hear people talking about the exponential growth of innovation we've seen in the space for cancer treatment, and I think T cell receptor therapies and engineered cell therapies are part of that. So things that were very hard to do 15 years ago when I was a PhD student are really routine nowadays. And I give you one example. This insertion of the T cell receptor gene into the T cell 15 years ago was quite a complex process already in the laboratory itself, but certainly on a level when you wanted to treat a patient, and it's very routine today. It was very inefficient 15 years ago. It's very efficient today. We had basically 2 technologies 15 years ago. Now we have probably 5 or 6 different ways how we can do that. So one of the challenges was 15 years ago is how you do that. That is not a real challenge anymore these days. I think what we're up against now is, I think we have learned over time how tremendously effective these treatments can be if we get it right. We see like really encouraging data when we treat patients with T cell receptor therapy, but there's lots still to do. And I think what we're up against is basically a tumor that obviously doesn't want to get detected by these kind of cells. So as an example, these tumors secrete molecules to shut off the T cells. We need to find ways that we make our cells more resilient towards these inhibitory mechanisms. That is a big focus of our research, for example. Then every cancer is different. So we're spending a lot of time trying to understand which molecules are most effective, which T cell receptors are most effective for certain patient groups. We're trying to find as many TCRs that are effective as we can to serve as many patients around the globe as we can. And if we succeed in all of that, I think the challenge that is left that we need to solve as a field is how we provide these treatments effectively to patients around the globe. The logistics nowadays are very challenging, but the vision of turning these therapies that are very bespoke today into an off-the-shelf drug is definitely there, and something that is super exciting and probably, hopefully, something that we as a field can solve in the next couple of years.
Good. And agreed that hopefully, here in the short term, that will come to fruition. One of the things we talk about in Cell and Gene all the time that we didn't necessarily, to your point about, hey, 15 years ago, things just were at a very, very different stage than they are today. And when I started with Cell and Gene 5-6 years ago, we were very focused on covering oncology. And now cut to, 2024 going into 2025, we cover far more than oncology, from autoimmune to cardiovascular, ophthalmology, what have you. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future landscape of cell therapy in oncology and beyond.
Yeah, so I think, as you say, it's tremendously exciting to see how this kind of technology that initially was explored mainly in oncology is now reaching other therapeutic areas. And in a way, it's exciting to see that the treatment follows the biology. There are many diseases that are related to the immune system where you could argue, if we can engineer the immune system, maybe we can help these treatments. And I think that is exactly what we're seeing now. So it's something we're very excited at AstraZeneca to explore. And I think also there's encouraging data, for example, for patients with certain autoimmune diseases, how, engineering immune cells to treat this disease could make a real difference to them.
Sure. Let's talk about the next 2 to 3 years. Where do you see cell therapy really land? Where are we going to be in 2 to 3 years? And what role will Neogene Therapeutics and AstraZeneca play in that space?
Yeah, so I think what we have seen over the last couple of years is how these kind of treatments have revolutionized the way we think about treating hematological malignancies as a starting point. I think we've seen how these therapies can, really transform the outcome for these patients. We're now, I think, at the verge where we see that we can probably expand this promise beyond hematological malignancies into other solid tumor indications. So I think over the next few years, we're certainly going to see more of these therapies being broadly used across different cancers, in particular solid tumors. And then I think, as you say, hopefully this will not stop in oncology. It will reach other areas like rare diseases and autoimmune diseases. And it's an area, like I said, where we're heavily investing as well to provide novel treatments. So I think the space or the modality as such will become a more accepted medicine across different disease areas, which is super exciting. And I think as a field, we will hopefully also see how these therapies not only become more effective, but also become more accessible. As I said, I think accessibility of these drugs is going to become tremendously important, especially with all the promise and encouraging data that we see today. So investing into how can we make this accessible to patients by turning this from an autologous therapy that has to be manufactured on a per patient basis into an off-the-shelf drug is going to be tremendously important. And I think the field will succeed in that ultimately. And that will, I think, really unlock the potential of these therapies for patients around the globe.
Good. All right. Thank you. All right, listeners, that wraps up this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast featuring Carsten Linnemann, Ph.D., CEO of Neogene Therapeutics, a member of the AstraZeneca Group. Carsten, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Erin. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. All right, listeners, we will talk to you soon.